2, 1. Hey, we're live. This is Darin Anderson on the Seamless Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Mike Carroll.
Hey, Darin, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. End of another week. It's been a busy one here at Nest Cowork. We've got an awesome event here today and can't wait to talk about it. Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about the event we're having at Nest Cowork and a combination of the Guadalajara Professional Network and Cybertech, and we got some special guests here. Liliana Miranda is joining us along with her co-founder Sean Cassidy, who actually established the network how many years ago now?
Been 5 years.
5 years in running. A very enlightened and tech-focused network professionals from Guadalajara, which is like Silicon Valley in Mexico. And we also have Pam Cornarubias. Did I say that right? Not quite. Covarrubias, thank you. And Rodrigo Gomez is here as well. So we're here to do our event, but let's talk a little bit about what brought us all together, which is this kind of collaboration between Guadalajara, which is sort of Mexico's Silicon Valley, and San Diego, which is also a strong tech hub for different types of technology.
Yeah, well, the genesis for the San Diego Guadalajara Professional Network came to me about 10 years ago, but I really didn't start it for the last 5 years. And a couple years ago, I've been going there for Mexico for 25 years, and I was married in Guadalajara. My wife is a Tapatía, and so
and you're I believe an Irishman.
I'm an Irishman, yeah. So it's a basically Irish-Mexican thing we got going on here.
And you're from Ireland originally and came over as a young person, or you were born here?
My father's from Galway, so I was born in Galway, but I grew up here.
I see.
And when I was really young, so yeah, I'm Irish, but I've lost that accent, yeah.
And then you found your heart taken by a Guadalajaran, so that's what kind of created the combination for you.
Yeah, Tapatía.
Tapatía.
It's not hard to have that to happen if you go there, actually.
So that's one of my favorite hot sauces. Like, does that mean like that's a hot relationship? Is that what you mean by Tapatía, or?
Tapatía is what they would call a person from Guadalajara, Tapatío or Tapatía. Tapatía meaning female, right? So each region of Mexico, people have the name that they're from that region, right? And that's what people that are female from Guadalajara are called, Tapatías. Yeah.
Terrific. Liliana, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings your interest around this topic.
About 2.5 years ago or so, I saw a group on Facebook coming around and people joining the group, and I'm like, who the heck is putting together a group from Guadalajara Professional Network, and I'm not involved, and I wanted to know more about who was involved doing it. So I reached out to Sean, and we started a conversation online, and then we got together in person and said, this is really interesting. We talked about his background. I wanted to make sure to vet him that he was a true Guadalajara binational person, and absolutely.
And you would know because you have roots in Guadalajara, correct?
Yes, I was actually born in Guadalajara, and I have a home in Jocotepec, Jalisco, and Chapala. My family's from Jocotepec, and I've been doing business in Guadalajara for a few years, actually for like 20 years. So going back and forth to Guadalajara and from my home there. So I'm very much involved with the Mexican consulate here in San Diego, as well as different binational relations with the government, particularly. And I just really saw how passionate Sean was by developing this network in a true collaboration, and I said I want to get involved. So since then I've been working with him in putting together these events where we invite people that are like-minded, that are just giving, wanting to share truly to collaborate and help each other in business. So that's how we ended up here.
Terrific. And I want to mention, because we've gotten to know each other a little bit, you actually have a connection to Silicon Valley. You kind of cut your teeth in Silicon Valley. So Guadalajara, which is sort of Mexico's Silicon Valley, but in several years back, you were actually kind of started your career. I believe you're a Berkeley grad.
Yes.
Go Cal. And so that kind of had you in the Bay Area. So your early career was all in Silicon Valley in the U.S.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I just getting out of college, got into law school, I started a company called Tuzona, which was we were doing translation services for product and product information that would then be listed on like Amazon and other companies, because they were wanting to do websites in Spanish, but they didn't have the product descriptions. So we put together a whole system to do that. But I was incubated at the Women's Technology Cluster in San Francisco, and Margarita Kiwis, which is a wonderful advisor and now very involved in peace and innovation at Stanford, was the director of the Women's Technology Cluster. So, but that was my first startup. And then I have a second startup called Tusona.com, which is an online site like magazine where we bring together people from the U.S. and Mexico online, and we cover stories binationally. So I've been in technology since I was 26 years old. Almost 20 years. I'll reveal myself.
Looks like you're just starting out. So Pam, great to have you here. Many of our listeners will probably know Pam. She's a well-known podcaster herself. You've been to many other people's podcasts, I understand, but you have your own podcast. Talk a little bit about your podcast and your background.
Yes, my podcast is Café con Pam. And I've been podcasting since 2016. I grew up in Mexico City, and when I came to the U.S. for college, I realized that not a lot of people looked like me that were doing amazing things, or they were not being featured in spaces. And then I went into the corporate world, and I started traveling a lot for business, and I was listening to shows, but none of them were showcasing people that looked or sounded like me, or were bilingual, or were Spanglishing in between their words. And so I wondered who's sharing those stories, and nobody was. So I started my show back then, and here we are.
Awesome. Well, share one story about one person that fits the category that you love to podcast about with our audience.
I always get this question, and it's so hard to pick one story.
But well, you can tell as many as you like. We got as much time as you need.
You know, one story that comes to mind is Dario Guerrero. He shared his story with me of his mom. He is an undocumented student. He went to Harvard, and his mom got cancer, and he self-deported himself because his mother went to Mexico to get treatment for cancer, and he self-deported, and then Harvard helped him get back.
Oh, I see. Cool.
So that was just a beautiful story.
Quite a journey. Good. So tell whoever wants to answer sort of some of the synergies that you see between Guadalajara, San Diego, Silicon Valley, or just other places in general.
I think there's a lot of synergy between these areas. I mean, there's a whole startup scene, a tech scene that's very much happening fluidly in Guadalajara that's happening here. The creative scene is very familiar there. As we have here, you know, the craft beer scene, the whole startup sectors, the AI, the filmmaking spaces are very intense there. Of course, very famous filmmakers come from Guadalajara. I think the last 3 directors that won the Academy Award are actually from Guadalajara. So, you know, there's a huge animation space there, and a whole space there of people doing heavy tech networking.
So it's sort of like film tech, if you will. You know, I mean, obviously there's a lot of creative talent there as well, but what has distinguished Guadalajara from the movie making and entertainment business is this kind of film tech region that's been established.
Well, they're gifted storytellers. And a lot of the really well-known directors that have come out of Guadalajara have went on to be very significant in the whole filmmaking space here in California. And, you know, they've also had a huge impact on investing into that sector in Guadalajara, including, you know, major animation centers and tech centers and developments like that. So they've done a lot of investment after doing quite well in California, you know, in the entertainment space. But in general in Guadalajara, though, for the last, I would say, 20 years, all the major tech spaces, and, you know, at HP, Oracle, they all have corporate headquarters, Latin American headquarters based there in Guadalajara. So several of the major multinationals have their headquarters based in the area called Zapopan, and they employ a lot of engineers. And the other thing that came out of Guadalajara, the reason that manifested out there, they have 3 universities there that are really quite significant. University of Guadalajara, and they produce really gifted, you know, engineers. And they have an engineer sector there that you know, takes people all over the world. Those engineers that they produce in Guadalajara. So they have a very good university sector for that development.
I would also like to add, I think that because of my relationships with government there. I also feel that the last three governors have really made a huge effort in investing in the universities and the infrastructure there, but also in the whole ecosystem throughout the city. I think that right outside of Guadalajara, right outside the airport, you have these huge hubs. I mean, you have Amazon, Walmart, the government really giving tax credits for these companies to come into the city. And as in the last 20 years, as the cities have grown, you really have the sector sort of divvying up. So you have in Zapopan a lot of these more graphic design and design theaters and all these things popping up in Zapopan for concerts. You also have the baseball stadium out in Zapopan, but you have properly in Guadalajara and downtown. They have the new subway system, and they're really trying to make it easy for the expansion of the airport. So much stuff is happening in Guadalajara to attract corporations to come to the city, and the governors, I was actually able to invite the first, it was 3 governors ago that I invited to come to the Silicon Valley. We did an event. I'm a co-founder of the Federación de San Francisco, Jalisciense de San Francisco. And we invited the governor to come out to Silicon Valley and have him tour Google and True throughout the city. We invite the mayors to come out as well. So we really try to help the city and the towns of Zapopan, Guadalajara, Tlaquepaque, Tonalá come and learn about Silicon Valley and how business is done in Silicon Valley. So this happened, 19 years ago before I moved to San Diego. So I'm very lucky to have really seen how it all started to explode and be participating. The new governor is going to be coming to the Bay Area in July, so we've invited him as well. So we try to have them once or twice a year come to Silicon Valley. We haven't had him in San Diego, but I think that would be an awesome opportunity.
Yeah, so obviously lots of synergies between the two communities, and we sort of tout San Diego as a alternative to San Francisco since it's gotten so expensive up there. You have a tremendous demand for the talent that's up there, and we talk a lot about the fact that at the end of the day, it's what are the people that you attract to your place, to your community. That's what really distinguishes you from other communities. And so, at least on Seamless Podcast, we talk a lot about the kind of intersection of art and lifestyle and technology. And I wonder if those sort of things are also, it sounds to me like those exact things are in place in Guadalajara when you think about the intersection of many different technologies, but there's also a vibrant arts community there. It kind of seems, other than Mexico City, a very vibrant area for the arts. Obviously, you talked about film tech and all the creative energy storytelling. You think of the tequila industry that's, I think, near part of Jalisco, which is the state that Guadalajara is there. And then you've got sort of Puerto Vallarta out on the coast, so you've got kind of a tourism piece. If you think about San Diego, we're sort of a 3-system traded economy. You have a third tourism, a third military, and then our third traded economy is technology. And inside of technology, you've got all the different technologies that make up San Diego, whether that's telecom, hardware, software. Do similar dynamics exist in Guadalajara?
Very much so. The tourism sector there is very, very large. Mexico City is the capital, and that's a massive city. It's over 30 million people.
One of the first mega cities, in fact.
Yeah, of course, mega cities. It's the second city. Like you saw, Chicago's the second city to New York, right? It's kind of like the second city. Guadalajara's the second city. But it has a unique flavor to that second city. It's quite creative city. It's a city that has a lot of creatives in it, and it supports creatives a lot. It actually does something in the U.S. that I don't see as much going on, and I'd love to see more going on here in California, where they do the total intersection of creatives with tech people. So you have these people that work for HP, but next door to them is a filmmaker, an animator, right? So and they're actually putting spaces together like that, where there's this lot of collaboration, and between creative, artistic people and creative technology people. App developers working with artists and things like that. But also the Mexican culture in itself is very artistic. I think it's part of the DNA of Mexicanos. I'm Irish, and I think the same way. The Irish are very creative, writers, or painters, printmakers, poets. But part of the DNA, I think, of Mexicanos are artistic people. They're very much artistic people. They are people that are very much like the arts and enjoy the arts and support the arts. And it's very much part of their actual DNA, their culture in itself.
I have the sense that there's like this deeper culture. Like I'm part Irish, so I can actually relate that we tend to be a scrappier lot. You know, it's like hustling, scrap, and I'm sure that's also part of Mexican identity as well. But I do get the sense of deeper culture and appreciation for culture, and was fascinated actually in talking to Liliana recently about sort of how Mexico gained its identity, which in some ways didn't even start to happen until like the 1950s. Can you touch a little bit on that?
Sure. I was at Cal. I was an undergraduate major in Spanish language and literature, but one of the classes we took was Mexicanidad, talking about how the Spanish culture actually kind of came to develop. So it was actually a government-initiated program where they started funding the arts to create and develop what was Mexicanidad, our identity, through funding artists like Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, and they were actually getting funding from the government to paint murals, development of museums throughout Mexico, and music as well, film. You have the golden age of cinema in Mexico that was sort of came to fruition in that time. So that very much then translated into what we today identify as Mexicano. So we are mestizo. All of these things, and actually I'm going to create a little bit of controversy.
Which real quick is a kind of combination of Spanish Europeans and native indigenous people.
Mexico,
Yeah,
So we are mestizo.
That's
but
what
even,
Mexican
yeah,
is.
but even that became identified by the government that said, this is going to be our identity. We are mestizo. Why? Because they wanted to sort of transcend these ethnic relations that were happening at the time, but also the class systems that we had in Mexico.
Kind of inside of, like, in all places, it seems like, we think of like the U.S. as having a certain culture around race, but almost every society has different castes, class, and
Mexico's class.
Yeah, exactly. Mainly like one top class and then everybody else.
Well, the way that I learned it in Mexico City, and there's the debate, right? But it's that when Mexico was colonized, like we're bringing it way back, right?
In 1300s, 1200s,
something like
that.
Yeah,
that's
so
no reference.
They came with slaves. So there was black people, there was the indigenous people, and then the Spaniards. And so then with that, people started mixing with each other, and that's when the classism began. And
Spaniards, I assume, being
the
at
top.
that time the top, because
Right.
they were bringing the
and
cash.
so and there's like
the weapons.
13, 17 types of classes that there are too many for me to remember. One is a mestizo. There you have the mulatos. You have
It's the kind of triangulation of the three races kind of intermingling. That's what creates the 13 unique,
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
And with that comes not only a kind of cultural and ethnic identity, but a kind of a concept around that group being different than the other groups, and class being kind of the driver.
Yeah, well, and bringing it back to the arts, that's the interesting intersection, because the painters and the murals that were happening, they were all by mestizos, right? And then you get the indigenous people that were kind of forgotten for a while, and then you get Coco.
Yeah, and then we discovered like all their amazing pyramids. Like, these folks have something to contribute here, like art and science and some crazy cool stuff.
Yes, and so everything. I mean, it all comes full circle. But Mexico, it's so deep into their culture, and it's just this pride thing, I think, that we have, and we're getting closer and closer to the roots of it.
Very cool.
And I just think it's also amazing to see how the culture is also seeping into what we as a result of what we make. So, for example, you have in San Diego, you have a beer that's being developed, but is it? What's the name? It's called like Azteca or something like that. Something.
You're talking about in San Diego.
In San Diego, so we have a lot of. I guess we're the San Diego Guadalajara Professional Network, but there's such synergy also with Baja. So when we say San Diego, we don't just mean like the city of San Diego. I mean, it's like the whole region.
Yeah, we've called it, there's different ways that people have tried to describe it, but this kind of mega region, which is like Baja, Imperial County, San Diego County, all put together as a kind of economic unit, which is a beautiful vision.
It is. I mean, I think that's really, we work as this little ecosystem here, because we have the breweries in Mexicali, in San Diego, sort of almost co-incubating each other, and then we have wine in San Diego and Temecula, in Valle de Guadalupe. In Valle de Guadalupe, that's happening all in this region as well. Yeah. And, we have members of our group as well that are doing collaborations to buy products together for breweries, and we are so that's very interesting. But getting it back also to the government again, because that's kind of my thing. The new governor of Baja, he is also very interested in developing this region, and they have what do they call it? They call it the Silicon Border, I think it is the term that I've heard thrown around.
Silicon Border, yeah, that's another classification of this kind of mega region concept. That came up, I started hearing that about 5 years ago. Like, we were talking about Robert Reyes, who we both know, like he was kind of plug and play. And
yeah. So it's very interesting to see, but I mean, I haven't seen it yet. I'm actually going to be meeting with the governor in the next week, but to really tour and learn more about the different offices that they're building, and they have a big emphasis in developing biotech. So we have a lot of biotech here in San Diego County, but sort of understanding they would really like to attract more of their testing to happen in Guadalajara, in Baja, as well as just what is it, offshoring? Is that what it's called?
It's a big offshoring's where offshoring, nearshoring.
Yeah, nearshoring, right.
Yeah, so San Diego companies or just U.S. companies might leverage some of the talent in Mexico in different areas.
Because we also have some strong universities in Tijuana.
Ensenada is very big for nearshoring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have companies that will be here tonight. So maybe I'd like to mention a little bit about the people that we're inviting for tonight.
Sure, that'd be great.
Just talk a little bit about. So we're having this collaboration with your Nesco Work and Cybertech here. We'd like to be able to invite companies to come and stay here or work from here as well. But in particular, we've decisively thought to invite university professors who in business and tech to come tonight. We've government officials in Guadalajara, actually all over, people from the Economic Development Center, and just sort of entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, investors, bankers, really trying to think about the ecosystem. What does everybody need? And again, it's with the point of collaboration, win-win. We aren't charging anyone anything. It's just, if once or twice a year we can bring these people together to benefit our community, that's what we want. We want to empower. That's what our group is about. What
are some of the business cultural differences that might exist with that you've either observed with Mexicanos or Americans? Is the business culture similar, or are there some things that we should be looking for tonight that's a little different? I'm sort of spilling the beans here because we were talking a little bit about it, but
well, I mean, I think in Mexico, and this is true in other parts of the world, but definitely in Mexico, it's very much a social environment, and business is done socially before you even really discuss business. It's about building trust, and so it's that's one of the reasons we have this kind of network. It's about building trust, so people can meet each other, build trust, and then then begin to work together. And you will not see people, moving to work together fast without really getting to know each other in Mexico. It just doesn't happen that way. And also, everything is centered around family. And so in Mexico, family is more important than business. I mean, you might say, you do business because there's a lot of family-owned businesses in Mexico, but you do business to support the family, to be part of the family. But if you're invited into somebody's home in Mexico, I mean, you're blessed. I mean, that's over. You don't get invited into somebody's home until you have trust. And so, once you have that kind of trust, you have something that's really very strong. It's a bond after that point, and to lose trust, then you won't get it back. You'll never get it back.
Maybe on a spectrum, but even in the United States, there's like cultural differences, right? Like I grew up on the West Coast, and we're very friendly. I think because we're largely immigrants and migrants from other parts of the U.S. and the other parts of the world. So I think to overcome the fact that we don't necessarily have deep family roots here on the West Coast, we're very open and friendly. Some call it superficial, especially in other countries. East Coast, much more, I feel like stoic. People are a little more serious. They have their ecosystem and their family, their friends. Very hard to penetrate into that. I think about Arabic, Middle Eastern culture where it's almost all friends. Like you can get to know somebody for weeks or months to build a kind of a business opportunity culture.
Right.
And then, European, maybe somewhere in the middle, and Asians, again, a spectrum where you have a lot of talk about social and knowing one another and building trust. Although it seems to me hard to really have trust there. That's my own observation. In Asian culture, I just feel like things are a little bit more Wild West, ironically. There, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but like you kind of got to keep your guard up a little bit.
Well, in Mexico, there are regional differences. For example, in some areas like Monterrey, Mexico is, when you meet people from Monterrey, Mexico, they're going to talk business 24/7. I mean, they're a business culture, always talking business, always about. If you meet somebody from Mexico City, they may be talking business, but a little different, not as intensely as they are in Monterrey.
Like Monterrey is like, this kind of strikes me as builders, man. They're like building stuff.
Yeah, they're
it's
building.
Kind of the industrial.
They're known for glass billionaires there, cement billionaires there. There's a huge amount of money in Monterrey.
I wonder if it's because they're norteños.
Well, they're norteños. Yeah, they're close to Texas.
To the U.S.
Yeah, they're
well.
close to Texas. But when you go there, it's a 24/7 business talk, and everything's talking about business. When you go to Guadalajara, it's talking about family. It's like my friends.
Lunches.
But it's also interesting because, like, I totally get what you're saying about like the Texas connection, but I then see like Texans are also that kind of family, a little more laid back. They appear to be real friendly. So that's an interesting mix, because to your point, you'd expect that to be a little bit more, down and dirty in terms of like Texans saying like, let's get to the business of it. And then there is maybe that inside of Texas culture, maybe in Dallas, for example.
Yeah, Dallas. Yeah. What's unique is, that whole element of southern Texas that had to develop over time. San Antonio was a large city, but then Monterrey was always a mega city compared to San Antonio. When you go to Monterrey, you're going to see some of the largest corporations in Mexico were based there for a long time. And of course, Savesa area is huge there, a huge amount of that. The whole construction space comes out of Monterrey. So there's a lot of multimillionaires living in Monterrey. I mean, and that's a very old city compared to cities in Texas. I mean, it's a very old city compared to city in Texas.
Probably 100 years or more.
Oh yeah. Well, Guadalajara is 1500s.
Yeah.
Guadalajara became a city in 1500s, so 1540s, something around that region. You might remember more than me, but about 1500s it became an actual city.
There was that time that sort of like what is Mexico, and it was Mexico then, like the Texas part of former Mexico, right, where there was that concentration of those folks, which were Americans.
Whoa, he knows that? I'm impressed.
Well, yeah. I mean,
They don't teach that here.
Don't teach that here, yeah.
Well, I read a non-American geography and history book,
Yeah.
Because you get a different version in that, right?
You're saying that we were in the right place.
Well, speaking of the right place, I just want to remind everyone that today's Seamless podcast is being brought to you by Nest Cowork, San Diego's #1 co-working space, located at 1855 First Avenue in Bankers Hill. Come check out the ambiance. We are dog friendly, so feel free to bring your pet. We have awesome outdoor patio areas as well as quiet offices if you need to get some work done. We host plenty of networking events like the one that we're hosting today, so come on by. You can check out more information at www.nestcowork.io. Over there, you'll be able to get a 7-day fuel pass. That's a free trial that'll let you experience everything we have to offer.
So, Mike, I want to give a shout out to New Jersey, because New Jersey's in the house.
Yes,
you have
East
a
Coast
friend
representing.
Here. East Coast is represented. Who else is here in the studio with us?
We also have Max, who's a new addition to the Seamless podcast. He's helping us get our video operation off the ground. So you'll actually be able to check out this podcast and all future podcasts on our YouTube channel. So check that out, Nest Podcast Studio on YouTube.
Awesome. So it would be a shame if we didn't spend the last segment talking to Pam, who's the most experienced podcaster in the room. And we like to talk a lot about entrepreneurial journey here at Seamless Podcast. We we have a lot of startup entrepreneurs that come in, and I'd really love to just sort of go through, if you don't mind, your own entrepreneurial journey, not just as a podcaster, but as someone that made your kind of business decisions and sort of entrepreneurial decisions. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Ask me a question. I have so many things.
Yeah. So just what sort of got you interested in entrepreneurialism? You obviously had a passion around identifying stories, which is interesting. You talk about Guadalajara as being storytellers. I don't know if that's the tradition that you come out of.
Well, my grandfather was a merchant. He had a store ever. And my mom had her own business. When I grew up as a
I can't imagine
mother.
where you've got any entrepreneurial influence.
And so I always wanted to, because I grew up with a single mom, and so I knew that she could make her own money. And when I was 12, I was like, okay, Mom, I want to help you make the money. And
your parents were split. You were raised by a single parent.
Correct.
Who was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. I think we got the picture.
Yeah, and so my first job, I started making jewelry. I was selling it in schools. I mean, if we can go, I'm throwing it back, right? And then I was helping my friends sell clothes, and then my mom had her store, and she would leave me in charge, and I was just like, okay, this is what we do, because this is what we do. And then I went into the corporate world because that's the story that my grandfather, who was a lawyer, he was all about the career and the school, and so I followed that path. And then I was like, I was not really employable because I wanted to fix all the problems, and my former boss was like, that's not your problem to solve. And I'm like, but it's broken. It needs to be solved. And so I left and I started my own business. And I did go to college. So I was like, the first thing I did when I left was, what can I do that I don't have to learn, that can bring me money right away, because I already have the skill. Otherwise, I'm wasting time. What
impact did your education have on you? I think different people see it differently. For me, it was like eye-opening, like, let's go talk about Socrates, because I came from a non-college family, so I had a very different concept of what college is versus like a stepping stone into a career. To me, it was more like load up your brain with liberal arts. But what did your education mean to you?
So interesting, because I went to school in Mexico City until high school. And then I came for high school to the U.S. I went back to Mexico City, and they laughed at my transcript from the U.S. because they were like, you studied 6 classes in a semester? And they were like, this is unbelievable. Because there, you do 12, 13 classes in a semester.
Yeah, most people don't know that more doctoral candidates and graduates come from Mexico than from the U.S. typically year over year. So a lot of smart people.
Yeah, and so then I came to college, and that was a whole different ballgame, because that's when, in my experience, that's when the real education began. And I loved the people that I met. I loved the experience. I went to college in Missouri, so it was very different from Mexico City. I know. And I really got exposed to the United States. I really had to feel and witness what people talk about the U.S.
It's always interesting, and we won't go down this path, but those are the folks that elected our current president. Those are the folks that they call the flyover states, that people don't seem to regard as strongly as the presence and maybe skills that they have. So it's an interesting place to have a perspective of, because then you probably came to the West Coast and it's like, whoa, that's different.
Well, I had always come because I was born in L.A.
Oh, okay.
So I'm the opposite immigrant. So I was born in the United States, and I grew up in Mexico.
Understood.
So I flipped the original Mexican story. And so I knew what the West Coast was. I always came for vacation, and family here is everywhere. And so I knew what the West Coast was. I knew what California was like.
Yeah, you sort of represent that vibe of kind of openness and friendliness and, cowabunga.
The Midwest was really interesting. And so going back to my entrepreneurial journey, then after I left the corporate world, I couldn't go back. I'm unemployable now.
Good for you. Congratulations. Tell us a little bit. You have a big opportunity. You're going to be speaking about podcasting in Australia. It's called the Australian Podcast Only, is it?
It's called Amplify.
Amplify.
Yes.
Great. Tell us a little bit about that, when you'll be there, and then end, if you will, with how folks can get a hold of you. Email, website, telephone number, and then I'll just we'll go around the room and get everyone's information about how to connect.
Totally. I have the opportunity to go speak at Amplify in Australia at the end of April, beginning of May, and I will be talking about podcasting there. I'm really excited because it's on the other side of the pond and really showcasing a brown voice down there. It's gonna be fun. And you can find me. I hang out a lot on Instagram. I'm a millennial, so follow me on Instagram at Cafe Con Pan Podcast, CAFECONPAM Podcast.
Terrific. A lot of people don't realize that most consider Australia part of Asia. Lilian, how do we get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me. We'll go through Instagram. You can find me on Soy Aventurera on Instagram, and that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, you can do www.cassiecreativesolutions.com, but I have 970,000 business followers, so it's not hard to find me. If you look at Sean Cassidy and Google it, Sean Cassidy, San Diego, you'll find me.
Awesome. And you can check out Seamless Podcast, subscribe through your favorite channel. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks so much. We're excited to do the next part of the evening, which is going to be a fun event with a little tequila tasting, a little Guadalupe wine tasting. I think we're actually going to do some street tacos, including a couple vegetarian options. So it should be a fun evening. So thanks everyone for participating. Engineer Mike, thanks, and all of our other in-studio guests. Thank you.